My name is Eleanor Whitfield, and for 7 years I was a senior structural engineer at Calloway Hayes Engineering in downtown Boston, a firm so prestigious that landing a job there at 26 felt like winning a lottery. I didn't even know I'd entered, and for the first 5 years I believed every late night, every weekend sketch session in my tiny apartment in Cambridge, every missed birthday of my niece Lily was worth it because Richard Calloway, the managing partner, kept telling me I was almost ready to be made principal engineer, a promise that turned out to be the most expensive lie of my career. Then came the Harbour Line Bridge project in the spring of 2019, a $47 million municipal contract that Richard treated like his personal Oscar moment. And during the 3rd week of design review, I noticed something the entire team had missed. The load calculations on the central span were using outdated wind shear data from a 2014 NOAA model. And given the new harbor wind patterns, the structure would experience harmonic stress failure within 6 to 8 years. So I drafted a 14-page corrective memo, walked into the Monday morning all-hands meeting with 43 colleagues, 2 city engineers, and 3 investors in the room, and politely raised my hand to suggest we revise the span calculations before submission. And that is the exact moment Richard Calloway leaned back in his leather chair, laughed the kind of laugh a man laughs when he wants to perform dominance, and said the words that rewired my life. "Eleanor, you're the most worthless engineer I've ever hired. Sit down before you embarrass yourself again. Leave the math to people who actually understand it." The silence that followed wasn't silence. It was a vacuum. The kind that sucks the oxygen out of your lungs and replaces it with shame. And I watched my mentee Sophie Patterson, a brilliant 24-year-old I had personally trained, lower her eyes into her coffee because she couldn't bear to witness what was happening to me. And I sat down, folded the memo neatly, and smiled, not because I forgave him, but because in that single second, something inside me went from soft to structural. Like steel, cooling into shape, I finished the workday, drove home to my 3rd-floor walk-up on Marlborough Street, opened a bottle of cheap Cabernet, and instead of crying I did something stranger. I opened a black notebook, wrote the date October 14th, 2019 at the top, and below it I wrote 3 sentences. "He will lose this firm. I will own it. He will not see me coming." The next morning I resigned with a 1-line email, effective immediately. Eleanor Whitfield, no goodbye, no LinkedIn announcement, no farewell lunch. I simply vanished from Boston's engineering scene the way smoke vanishes from a room. And for the next 11 months I lived off my savings. Took a contract gig, reviewing bridge inspections for a small county in Vermont that paid $42,000 a year. And every single night after work, I sat at my kitchen table, teaching myself 2 things. Richard never thought a worthless engineer could learn corporate finance and acquisition law. I read Damodaran on valuation until my eyes burned. I took night classes at Suffolk University Law School as a non-degree student, and I built a private spreadsheet tracking every public filing, every press release, and every client departure from Calloway Hayes. Because I knew what nobody else knew, yet that bridge would fail its first major inspection by 2022, and the firm's reputation would crack along with it. In March of 2020, I registered Whitfield Structural Solutions LLC with $3,000 of savings, a refurbished Dell laptop, and a single client, a small developer in Providence who needed someone to review a parking garage retrofit. And within 18 months, that one client became 7, then 19, then 46. Because I did something Richard had forgotten how to do. I returned every call within 2 hours. I delivered every report 3 days early, and I never, not once, made a junior engineer feel small for catching a mistake. And slowly, the whisper network of Boston engineering started saying my name in the way they used to say his. Meanwhile, exactly as I had predicted, the Harbour Line Bridge developed visible microcracking in the central span by August 2022. The city commissioned an independent forensic review. The review confirmed the wind-shear miscalculation I had flagged in that 2019 memo. A memo that, thank God, I had emailed to my personal address before resigning and stored in 3 separate cloud backups. And when the Boston Globe ran the story in October 2022 under the headline Engineering Firm Faces Liability Over Bridge Design Flaws, Calloway and Hayes lost 4 major clients within 90 days, and their valuation dropped from an estimated $28 million to under $9 million by the spring of 2023. And that is when I made my move. I didn't approach Richard directly because I knew his ego would refuse to sell to a woman he once called worthless. So I worked through a Delaware-based holding company called Marlborough Holdings, LLC, named quietly after the street where I once cried into a glass of cheap wine. And I made an all-cash offer of $7.4 million. Conditional on a 30-day close, and a clause that the managing partner would remain seated until the day of transfer. A clause Richard interpreted as protection for his position, but which I had inserted for one reason only: I wanted him in that chair when I walked through the door. The deal closed on a Tuesday, December 12, 2023. The cold kind of Boston Tuesday where the wind off the harbor cuts straight through wool. And at exactly 9:47 in the morning, I walked into the lobby of Calloway and Hayes, the same lobby where I had badged in for 7 years. And the receptionist, Marcia, bless her, looked up, recognized me, and her mouth fell open before she could stop it. And I just smiled and said, "He's expecting Marlborough Holdings, isn't he? Tell him Marlborough is already here." I walked the long hallway alone, past my old desk, which somebody had turned into a printer station, past the conference room where my voice had died 4 years earlier, and I pushed the door open without knocking. And there he was, Richard Calloway, 58 years old, grayer, smaller somehow, sitting at the head of the same mahogany table. And beside him sat his lawyer and a junior partner, and Richard stood up to greet the buyer with that practiced political smile he wore like armor. And the moment he saw my face, that smile didn't just fall, it collapsed. The way a building collapses when the central span finally gives pure, silent, structural failure. And his lawyer, sensing something was wrong but not knowing what, kept extending his hand toward me, and I shook it, sat down in the chair Richard had once ordered me out of, opened my folder, slid the signed transfer documents across the table, and said calmly, "Mr. Calloway, my name is Eleanor Whitfield. I'm the sole owner of Marlborough Holdings, which as of 9 this morning is the sole owner of Calloway and Hayes Engineering. And I'd like to begin by thanking you, because 4 years ago, in this exact room, you told me I was worthless. And that one sentence is the only reason I had the discipline to build the company that just bought yours." He didn't speak. He didn't move. He just looked at the table the way a man looks at a grave he's been forced to dig himself. And his lawyer started shuffling papers nervously. And I let the silence stretch for what must have been 20 seconds, because I had earned every second of it. And then I leaned forward, lowered my voice so only he could hear. And I whispered the one sentence I had rehearsed in my head 1,000 times. The math was never the problem. "Richard, you were," and 48 hours later, his resignation letter arrived in my inbox. 2 sentences long, no apology, no explanation. And I forwarded it to no one. I simply printed it, slipped it into the black notebook beside my October 14, 2019 entry, and closed the cover. The very first hire I made as the new owner was Sophie Patterson, the mentee who had lowered her eyes that day, and I promoted her to lead engineer of the new bridge division, which I renamed the Integrity Group. And on her first day, she cried in my office and said, "I should have said something that day, Eleanor. I'm so sorry." And I told her the truest thing I know, that silence in the face of cruelty is not betrayal. It is survival. And the only people who owe an apology are the ones who weaponize power against people who have none. If you're watching this right now and someone has ever made you feel small in a room full of people who said nothing, I want you to hear me clearly. You are not worthless. You have never been worthless. And the quietest revenge in the world is not destruction. It is becoming so undeniably excellent that the people who underestimated you have to watch their own reflection in the polished surface of the life you built without them. So write down today's date, write down what they said, and then go build the thing that proves them wrong. And when you do, come back to this video and tell me your story in the comments below. Because I read every single one, and I am still, 4 years later, the most worthless engineer Richard Calloway ever hired.